Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. You're tuned in to episode 1 of our series on separation. And this morning we're talking about the tactics of violence that destroyed Black settlements. It's a tough subject. You might be triggered, but it's for educational purposes, for us to understand how we need to strategically plan as we move forward. So be a friend, tell a friend, and we'll be right back in about 3 minutes.
O Allah, guide me among those whom Thou hast guided aright, and preserve me among those whom Thou hast preserved, and befriend me among those whom Thou hast befriended. Bless me in whatsoever Thou dost grant me, and deliver me from the evil of what Thou hast judged. Surely Thou judgest, and none can judge against Thee, and he whom Thou befriendest is not disgraced. Blessed art Thou, O Lord, and exalted be Thee above what they set up besides Thee. I bear witness, nothing deserves to be served besides Thee, and I bear witness that Muhammad is Thy servant and apostle. Amen.
Assalamu alaikum, family. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. Wishing you all peace and love. We're going to tackle a tough subject today. I want to warn you that it may be triggering. It may be something that's difficult for you to hear or even learn about. I'm your host, Sajdah Wendy Muhammad. I'm an international business and real estate professional. I guess I can now say award-winning international business, real estate professional, and historic preservationist. I'm an artist, and business is my canvas. You all know me who know I hate the way we feel compelled to define ourselves by what we've accomplished. I prefer to define myself by what I'm striving for, and that is to be a Muslim, to be a God. So this is week one of our 5-part series on separation. We're going to go deeper into it, but this is the first 5-part series. The first thing we are doing is studying history. And we know, I'll show you all a video later where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us that history is the greatest at rewarding its student. In these 5 days, we're going to talk about Black settlements that were created during Reconstruction. We're going to understand that the concept of separation is not new, but there is a way in which we must do it, a reason in which we must do it, and the way we must move is something that we have to go a little bit deeper in. And I believe here where we work to help support conscious entrepreneurs is where we should begin this class and this study. So these 5-part series, today we're going to talk about the tactics of violence that were used to destroy these Black settlements. Then Tuesday, we're going to talk about racist planning regimes, like city planning regimes that were racist, that destroyed the Black towns. We're going to talk on Wednesday about forced sales and land loss. I know we all got people. I don't even know any Black person that can't tell you that they used to have land down south and somehow it got lost. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about property assessments on Thursday. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about environmental injustice. And so in building these separate territories, these are all things that we need to be thinking about and thinking through. Okay. So let me pull my notes up here and we're going to go ahead and get started. More than 1,200 historically Black towns were founded during the years of Reconstruction. And at the end of the 19th century, continuing into the early 20th century, but several were established long before the Civil War. Historic Black towns, both incorporated and unincorporated, can be understood as settlements that are predominantly inhabited and governed by Black people and were established to create safe and autonomous communities amidst widespread racial discrimination and violence. From coast to coast and in each pocket of the United States, Black entrepreneurs, farmers, and professionals broke ground in new locations throughout Florida, California, Oklahoma, and I should note that there were 50 Black towns in Oklahoma alone. And I know a lot of us hear about Black Wall Street, but there were 50, Texas and beyond. In places like Oklahoma, for example, Black families and individuals thrived economically and politically without the violent oversight and control of white supremacist culture and politics. I also have to add in here that our self-improvement process given to us by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is absolutely germane to peace and love and the development of our separate territories, our businesses, and doing for self. Because if we're constantly competing against each other for no reason, trying to figure out how to strategize and knock the legs out from up under another Black person, if we're constantly doing these, constantly threatening each other, constantly mimicking the mind of Satan when it comes to each other, none of us will be successful in this endeavor. The dramatic loss of Black towns and settlements was far from accidental. A host of systemic challenges and mechanisms of dispossession have enabled the erasure of these spaces. Now, I want us to begin to think about how we prevent these tactics and others that we will lay out here on the show. Okay, we're just raising awareness. We're studying history. It's time for us to start moving towards planning, because a lot of us are finding us in situations right now where we need this history and we need these lessons. So what better place to do it here than here on the Mind of an Entrepreneur show, where we're working to help entrepreneurs do for self and learn how to rise above being hand to mouth or living paycheck to paycheck. So tactics of direct violence. Though often viewed as a tactic of the past, state-sanctioned mob violence, strategically employed to suppress Black progress and autonomy in service of white supremacy, has left enduring generational impacts. This violence was often coordinated with explicit state approval or tacit allowance and sought to dismantle Black autonomy, economic growth, and community stability. Let's begin this discussion with the Muslim program given to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Point number 4 of what the Muslim Wants says. And if you want to go and read this, if you're not familiar, if you have an older Muhammad Speaks newspaper, it'll be on the very back page. If you have an older Final Call newspaper, it'll be on the very back page. If you have a Final Call newspaper that you just purchased last week, it'll be on the inside back cover. Point number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, says this: we want our people in America whose parents or grandparents were descendants from slaves to be allowed to establish a separate state or territory of their own, either on this continent or elsewhere. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to provide such land and that the area must be fertile and minerally rich. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to maintain and supply our needs in this separate territory for the next 20 to 25 years until we are able to produce and supply our own needs. Now, moving along, in a much talked about interview, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan appeared on April 13th, 1997 on NBC Television's Meet the Press. Okay, it was a television show back in the 90s. He was interviewed by Tim Russert and David Broder. The subject of separation came up, and here is some of the dialogue. The interviewer said, "In preparing for this interview, I read the literature that your organization puts out and publishes, and I like to go through it to find out what you believe and how it affects America." And then he holds up, should have brought my Final Call newspaper. He holds up the Final Call newspaper, and then he says, "This is your newspaper, the Final Call, which comes out once a month." And on the back page, and then the minister interrupts and says, "Once a week." And the interview goes on, says, okay, once a week. On the back page is the Muslim program, what the Muslims want. And if I can go through a few of these, let me put one on the screen and get your reaction. So he puts up point number 4. And then he says, the first is in terms of territory. And you'll see, since we cannot get along with them in peace and equality, he's quoting it, we believe our contributions to this land and the suffering forced upon us by white America justifies our demand for complete separation in a state or territory of its own. Close quote. Is that your view in 1997, a separate state for Black Americans? And the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan responds like this, quote, "First, the program starts with number 1. That is number 4. The first part of that program is that we want freedom, a full and complete freedom. The second is we want justice. We want equal justice under the law, and we want justice applied equally to all, regardless of race or class or color. And the third, the minister goes on to say, is that we want equality. We want equal membership in society with the best of civilized society. If We cannot get that within the political, economic, social system of America. There's no need. Let me rephrase that. I said that wrong. The minister goes on to say, if we can get that within the political, economic, social system of America, there's no need for point number 4. But if we cannot get along in peace after giving America 400 years of service and sweat and labor, then of course separation would be the solution to our race problem. Close quote. All right, now, this concept of separation bothers a lot of people, both black and white. Some view this concept as an extreme overreach, and many are downright afraid to even think of this subject. I want to ease you into the concept because this concept of separation was performed numerous times during Reconstruction, except absent a protective military, had many of those towns sustained, we'd be having a different conversation today. How do we avoid the repeat of history that led to the destruction of these towns? What happened and what were the signs? Now, I hope y'all all right. We got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to keep going. Now, some of us may separate by being pioneers and building new towns and settlements. Some of y'all are going to be building new towns and settlements. This historical look back is for you to use as strategy when you are planning and developing. Others of us are already separated. After finding ourselves in towns and suburbs or even major cities where all the people that look like us, all the people that don't look like us have left us, and we are now left to govern ourselves and take care of ourselves. This historical look back is for you too, because you now quickly have to learn how to govern and to protect and improve upon what already exists. Some of us are rebuilding wasted cities. Others of us will be forced to separate because we just can't get our morals together. So we may end up governing ourselves anyway. See, none of this works if we don't work on ourselves. And then some of us are here watching this show saying, I like being the only Black person in my town or neighborhood. I like the exclusivity. It makes me feel like I've arrived. I can't live around niggas. And I'm better than the average Black person. Okay, well, this is for you too. These universal principles taught to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad are rooted in creating a civilized society. We all have to do that. No matter what form of separation we find ourselves in right now, here today. And since we have all taken on the mind and behaviors of Satan in some form or another, we all must begin a self-improvement process, and we all must learn the principles of freedom, justice, and equality. And this predatory behavior that we exhibit towards one another, the way we're constantly strategizing against one another, trying to take each other down, trying to compete. Oh, she got a show. She trying to do this. Well, we're going to make sure this don't happen, or we're going to do this. We got to stop. And I don't believe that you or I will be rewarded with success if we continue to think and act like that. Allah, I believe, is going to begin to award those of us that are collaborative, supportive, form partnerships, and follow these instructions. So what happened to these 1,200 or so Black settlements, towns, and villages that were constructed in the late 1800s and early 1900s? Many of them suffered tactics of direct violence. This type of violence was so severe that it still affects us to this very day. Did you know there were 2,000 plus documented lynchings of Black people that occurred during this era? Nearly 1 every 2 days. That's from the Equal Justice Initiative. In total, 34 mass lynchings targeted Black communities during Reconstruction, with at least 12 large-scale massacres resulting in hundreds of deaths. Individual incidents of arson, assault, rape, and shootings were widespread, often going unreported and unpunished. So when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to us that we must separate or die, many of us couldn't wrap our minds around the concept of separation. In fact, many of us can't wrap our minds around it yet, still today. We go along, but we don't get it. We can't do it. See, violence, whether it's domestic, community-based, state-sanctioned, or war-related, can cause generational trauma. This is why you're saying to yourself, I don't know. I'm going to say that again. Violence, whether it's domestic, community-based, state-sanctioned, or war-related, can cause generational trauma, also known as intergenerational or transgenerational trauma. This kind of trauma doesn't stop with the person who experienced the original violence. So if your great-great-grandparents were around during this type of violence, if they watched it, or even if they were victims of it, it can affect their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, until we decode ourselves and heal ourselves. It's still affecting us. Now, let's talk about how violence can contribute to generational trauma, because I want us to understand that it's not one thing to just take a look at. Here, let me say it this way. Many of us are so separate from our history. We don't know our ancestors. Most of us can't even name our great-grandfathers or great-grandmothers' names, let alone a great-great-grandmother or a great-great-grandfather. There are a few of us that can, but a lot of us can't. Okay? And this type of violence that we look at when we watch these videos, and we're going to look at a little video later, oftentimes we attempt to separate ourselves from it. And in that attempt to separate ourselves, we're now moving blindly because it happened to us. And we're wondering what's blocking us, what's holding us back. See, violence has biological and psychological transmissions. Violence transmits to us biologically and psychologically, even if it happened 2-3 generations ago. This is why our self-improvement processes and studying is so critically important, because we have to dedicate to healing. Now, how does violence translate to us biologically and psychologically? Let's talk about this really quickly. There's epigenetics. Exposure to violence and trauma can alter how genes are expressed without changing your DNA itself. These epigenetic changes can be passed to offspring, affecting stress response systems. If you have family members that were in one of those massacres or who watched it, okay, that can alter how your genes are expressed. It can create a heightened stress response. So descendants may inherit a nervous system that is primed for danger, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, and emotional dysregulation. You can have attachment wounds. See, traumatized caregivers may struggle to form secure attachments. This is why a lot of us can't commit, leading to attachment disorders or difficulties in emotional regulation in the next generation. Okay? This type of violence has affected our family dynamics and our parenting. There's dysfunctional coping, meaning that survivors of violence may normalize emotional numbing, substance use, or aggression, modeling these behaviors to their children. These things are passed down oftentimes. There's silence and secrecy. We all know about that. There's just a lot of things in the Black family we just don't even talk about. Some families avoid discussing trauma altogether. They create an unspoken rule in the family where there's just certain things you just don't talk about. Others may repeat the trauma narrative in a way that re-traumatizes or burdens the younger generations. And then many children can be forced into caretaker roles when a parent is emotionally unavailable due to unhealed trauma. All this has an effect. This violence has affected our culture and our community. There's the collective trauma, meaning violence inflicted on a community, like colonization, genocide, systemic racism, war. Violence inflicted on a community becomes embedded in their cultural identity and memory. There's the loss of trust. We say, look, I just don't trust these people. I ain't trying to go to no separate territory. We got to deal with that. Communities affected by systemic or repeated violence may develop chronic mistrust of institutions or authority figures. Then there's the ongoing oppression that we see happening every day in our day-to-day lives. When violence is tied to structural systems, the trauma continues unless the system changes. Lastly, let's go over this. Behavioral and social effects. You get cycles of violence where children raised in violent or traumatized environments are more likely to reenact violence or victimization unless intervention occurs. You got the brainwashed who are now becoming the brainwashers. We're killing and massacring each other. How many of us could possibly potentially trace our genetics or our ancestry back to one of those massacres? There's educational and economic setbacks. So trauma affects concentration, memory, and motivation. It impacts our educational attainment, our success in our careers. We become socially isolated. There's the shame and the stigma or the fear of what we may have gone through. Okay? This is what all the violence has done to us and how we are affected to this very day. Okay? Now, here are some of the primary tactics that they deployed to destroy these Black settlements. And I just want to say to you that this can be triggering. We just talked about all the ways in which that violence has affected us and the things that we now have to work on before we go into, or as we move into, separation, as we move into doing for self. All right. There were massacres via what they call organized militias. There were militants like the Ku Klux Klan, the White League, the Red Shirts, and the Knights of the White Camellia. They weaponized armed assaults on entire communities. They stormed courthouses or neighborhoods, literally just to kill and instill fear. Let me give you a couple examples. There was the Colfax Massacre in April of 1873 in Louisiana. We're going to watch a video on that in a few minutes, where 150 or 300 Black militia and freedmen were killed after surrendering. Only 3 white people died. This was described by historian Eric Fauner as the worst instance of racial violence during Reconstruction. There was the Opelousas Massacre in 1868 in Louisiana also. It involved a 2-week campaign of lynchings, shootings, and terror. 2 weeks. The death toll estimates range from 150 to 300 Black residents, according to The Guardian. There was the Hamburg Massacre in 1876 in July, where a white paramilitary Red Shirts shot to death 6 Black militiamen to intimidate Black political authority. They also used the tactic of urban race and riot programs. White mobs, often aided by the police, attacked Black neighborhoods. Why are we going over this? Because we need to know this history, because we are already separating. We're going to continue this separation process. We have to understand what happened. History has a tendency to repeat itself. And so we have to know how to strategically handle this. So they were urban race riots and programs. Okay. White mobs aided by police, state sanctioned, attacked Black neighborhoods. You had the Memphis Massacre in 1866, May of 1866. 46 Black residents were killed, 75 injured, homes, churches, schools burned. You had the New Orleans riots, both in 1866 and 1874, Yazoo City, Lawrence, etc., commonly triggered during elections or political gatherings. You had the night riders and the incendiary attacks. The night riders, mounted vigilantes, terrorized Black towns at night with arsons, beatings, and intimidation. We hear about that a lot. You saw that in the Malcolm X movie. There was Oscarville, Georgia in 1912. Firebombs were launched into churches. Residents were assaulted and displaced. See, this is why a lot of us are scared. Then they began to destroy institutions and displace us. So Black homes, churches, and schools were often burned or bombed. You've seen that in Memphis and Oscarville. Entire towns saw residents forced to flee, often permanently displaced. Land and property were seized by whites. Black businesses and infrastructure, especially politically active or economically independent, were prime targets, seen as threats. The goal was to prevent economic independence through terror that stopped property ownership, entrepreneurship, and institution building, and to reinstitute white supremacy by terrorizing communities and nullifying Reconstruction era politics. All right. Now we're going to go here, and I want you to learn about the Colfax murders and massacre. Again, this is triggering. I'm not trying to trigger you. I'm trying to get you to learn and think, all of us, to learn, think, and strategize, because it's time for us to stop talking and start strategizing. How are we going to prevent these things? And like I mentioned, today we're talking about these tactics of violence. Tomorrow we're going to talk about racist planning regimes. Wednesday we're going to talk about forced sales and land uses. Thursday we're going to talk about property assessments. Friday we're going to talk about environmental injustice. All right. So we're not going to talk about violence all week, but violence I wanted to start this program with because it has to wake us up. All right. So let's check out the Colfax massacre.
Throughout history, there have been innumerable massacres, large numbers of people killed for many reasons, and the U.S. has not been immune. Before, during, and especially after the Civil War, racial tensions rose to new heights, and most tensions reached a boiling point after former slaves were given new freedoms under the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, the 14th Amendment, which granted freed blacks citizenship and civil rights, and the Fifth Amendment, giving black men the right to vote. Formerly enslaved people were given these freedoms, citizenship, and the right to vote, but these new laws were considered detrimental social and lawful order by many whites. After the Civil War, the United States tried to rebuild during Reconstruction, and for a brief, fragile moment, America came close to fulfilling its founding ideals. But there were challenges and dangers for Black Americans. What was the Colfax Massacre? When and where did it occur? What was the aftermath? How did this event affect the freed slaves long term? How was it remembered today? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. This is not just a story of violence, it's a story of betrayal, silence, and the slow suffocation of a promise called Reconstruction. In Grant Parish, Louisiana, a place carved out to be majority black, these rights weren't just theory, they were law. In the years following the U.S. Civil War, a number of freedmen and white candidates sympathetic to the cause of racial equality were elected to office across the South, creating tensions that would explode. This progress stirred up deep resentments among the other white Southerners, bitter over the loss of the Civil War and eager to once again enshrine white supremacy into law. It seemed that one person was trying to mend the emotional damage caused by the war. His name was James Madison Wells. In March 1865, James Madison Wells became governor. As the Democratic nominated legislature passed the black codes restricting rights of freed slaves, Wells supported allowing freed blacks to vote, as well as disenfranchising ex-Confederates, not allowing them to vote. He scheduled a new constitutional convention for July 30th, 1866, to try and make this a state law. However, the convention was postponed because the New Orleans massacre occurred on that very day when armed Southern white Democrats attacked blacks who had a parade supporting the convention. The mayor of New Orleans had asked the local military commander to patrol the city and protect the convention and its supporters, but the U.S. Army failed to respond in time, and a group of white Democrats attacked the unarmed blacks, killing 34 black and 4 white people supporting them and wounding more than 40 others, with the majority of the wounded being blacks. It was during Reconstruction that federal troops were stationed throughout the South to pacify the region and protect elections. President Andrew Johnson blamed such events on Republican agitators, and the Freedmen's Bureau, along with the occupation armies, had been successful at preventing the implementation of the Southern Black Codes, which would limit the rights of blacks, but gave them the rights to work and choose where they wanted to live. This did not sit well with the white majority. The Reconstruction Act was passed on March 2, 1867, over President Johnson's veto, which required that black men be given their rights in southern states but not applicable in northern states. Also, southern states had to ratify the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship and equal rights to African Americans after the Civil War before their readmission into the Union, which was another major point of contention. President Johnson, a Democrat, prevented the Republican governor of Louisiana from using either the state militia or U.S. forces to suppress the insurgent groups, such as the Knights of the White Camellia, even after more violence against blacks occurred, to include burning the homes of blacks as well as white Republican supporters. In November 1868, the criminal activity reached a new level. William Smith Calhoun, a major plantation owner, inherited the property and slaves from his father, Meredith Calhoun. William Smith Calhoun, despite being a former slaveholder, lived with a mixed-race common-law wife, and he supported black freedoms and equality. He was a major organizer of the Black Republicans. Calhoun led a group of freed blacks to vote at a store owned by one John Huey, where the ballot box was located. Huey openly threatened to publicly whip the blacks if they voted Republican. Calhoun had the ballot box moved to a plantation store owned by a fellow Republican, and 150 black votes were cast, with the Republicans receiving 318 votes and the Democrats only 49. In a rage, a group of white men stormed in and took the ballot box and threw it into the Red River. The white Democrats then arrested Calhoun, alleging election fraud, and with the original ballot box missing, Democrat Michael Ryan went on to claim a landslide victory. This election was also marked by violence, such as when Election Commissioner Hal Fraser, a black Republican, was murdered. As a result, Calhoun drafted a bill to create a new parish out of parts of Wynn and Rapides parishes, which passed the Republican legislature, and other new parishes were also created by the Republican state legislature to try and secure better political control. When Ulysses S. Grant became president in 1869, he hit back against the KKK hard and saw legislation passed securing blacks their rights. Needless to say, it was not a very popular decision. The Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871 that Grant signed into law prohibited people from congregating with the purpose of disrupting an election and gave the federal government the authority to use its troops in defense of blacks and their new constitutional rights. One of the greatest tensions was the right for blacks to own guns. Black men were elected to office, they organized militias, and they stood up for their civil liberties. But freedom has enemies, and they were sharpening their knives. In 1872, a contested election threw Louisiana into political chaos when the Republican candidate, William Pitt Kellogg, one of Louisiana's U.S. senators, was declared the winner as governor, but the Democrats, still loyal to the Confederacy in all but name, refused to accept it, and both sides declared victory. John McHenry, the Democrat candidate, had lost fairly, but the KKK was not about to let that election stand. The segregationist and Reconstructionist sides fought a legal battle as well as physical battles, sending armed men to occupy various government buildings. In March of 1873, pro-Reconstruction forces occupied the Grant Parish Courthouse in Colfax. Stoking the flames, the Klan spread rumors throughout the community, playing on fears that the blacks would start a Nat Turner style of revolt and attack whites. And please see our video on Nat Turner. On April 8th, the anti-Republican Daily Picayune newspaper of New Orleans inflamed tensions and distorted events with the following headline: The riot in Grant Parish, fearful atrocities by the Negroes, no respect shown to the dead. This article brought even more whites to Grant Parish, all experienced Confederate veterans. They also brought a 4-pound cannon that could fire iron slugs. As the Klansman Dave Paul said, "Boys, this is a struggle for white supremacy." The black Republicans rightly feared an armed coup by the Klan and their Democrat supporters, so they had fortified the building, which was surrounded by cane fields and cypress trees. A few armed themselves, and the men dug trenches around the building, vowing to hold the line. Then, on Easter Sunday, April 13th, 1873, the white militia came. The white militia was led by former Confederate officer Christopher Columbus Nash and over 300 white men, many being Klansmen, and they surrounded the courthouse. The black defenders numbered around 150, and they held out for several hours. The two sides exchanged fire, but the roughly 60 defenders inside the courthouse surrendered after the white supremacists aimed a cannon at the building. The defenders displayed white flags for surrender, one made from a shirt, the other from a page of a book. The shooting stopped, but it was really just getting started. Reportedly in response to the accidental shooting of their leader by one of their own, the whites, growing tired of the standoff, then set the courthouse ablaze, and as the defenders fled, the white supremacist force began to execute captured and wounded members of the militia. As the blacks fled, many were unarmed and others were surrendering. They were hunted down and executed. Many were shot in the back. Many were shot in the head and neck. Dozens were taken prisoner. Many were lynched. Others, not shot, were beaten to death. The rest who escaped were tracked down and then murdered hours later. Many were shot after laying down their arms, and others were killed while trying to escape across the Red River, and they were chased on horseback. The horrors continued for the rest of the day and through the night, and only 3 white attackers had died. The whites then spread out into the town, indiscriminately murdering black residents of Colfax. By the time the Louisiana State Militia arrived the next day, April 14th, an estimated 150 people had been killed, but an exact count was made difficult by the hiding of many of the bodies. Over 150 black men were killed, and their bodies were dumped in a mass grave. Some were buried alive, and some were burned alive. Then the news reached federal authorities, and federal prosecutors tried to seek justice. Kellogg ordered the state militia under Colonels Theodore Decline and William Wright to Colfax, with warrants to arrest 50 white men and to install a new compromise slate of parish officers. Decline and Wright found the smoking ruins of the courthouse at Colfax, and many bodies of men who had been shot in the back of the head or the neck. However, the exact number of dead was never really established, but 2 U.S. Marshals who visited the site on April 15th and buried dead reported 62 casualties. A military report to Congress in 1875 identified 81 black men by name who had been killed, and that between 15 and 20 bodies had been thrown into the Red River, with another 18 being secretly buried, for a grand total of at least 105. A state historical marker from 1950 noted fatalities as 3 whites and 150 blacks. Several of those arrested were convicted of crimes under the Enforcement Acts, but other more serious charges, such as murder, were brought against several white perpetrators under the Enforcement Acts, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Acts, laws which were designed to protect black civil rights. The U.S. Attorney, James Roswell Beckwith, in New Orleans, sent a telegram about the massacre to the U.S. Attorney General. The Colfax massacre made the headlines of national newspapers in almost every major city in the country. A Republican federal judge in New Orleans ruled that the Republican majority legislature be seated despite the massacre and the best efforts of the Klan. What emerged was the established rule that protections of the 14th Amendment did not apply to persons acting individually, but only to the actions of state governments. Due to this ruling, the federal government could no longer enforce the Enforcement Act of 1870 to prosecute actions by paramilitary groups such as the White League, which had chapters forming across Louisiana beginning in 1874. Intimidation, murders, and voter suppression by such groups were instrumental to the Democratic Party regaining political control of the state legislature by the late 1870s, and it continued for almost a century afterward throughout the southern states and beyond. The case was known as U.S. versus Cruikshank, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court in an 1876 decision that changed the nation. The federal government, they ruled, has no authority to prosecute individuals for civil rights violations under the 14th Amendment unless the state failed to act. Under that ruling, the killers walked free and the federal government all but abandoned Reconstruction. The Colfax Massacre was the beginning of the end of freedoms for Black Americans. This decision gutted federal enforcement of civil rights protections and essentially gave a green light for racial violence in the South. The legacy of the ruling against the perpetrators only emboldened the white vigilantes. In August 1874, Republican office holders in Coushatta, Red River Parish were thrown out, assassinating the 6 white Republicans before they could leave the state and killing up to 15 blacks who witnessed the murders. Violence like this was used by white Democrats to intimidate Republican voters and elected office holders, used to gain control of the state legislature in the 1876 elections and ultimately to end Reconstruction in Louisiana. Emboldened by the decision, the Ku Klux Klan rose again and Jim Crow laws erupted all across the South. Voting rights were stripped. Lynchings became common. Blacks could not own guns. Some locations implemented sundown laws, meaning curfews, laws imposed stating that no blacks could be out after sundown or they would be arrested if they were lucky. These lasted until the late 1960s. The Colfax Massacre is believed to be the deadliest single incident of racial violence of the Reconstruction period, though it was by no means the only one. Faced with a still powerful segregationist force that was willing to use violence to hamper the work of Reconstruction, the project of enforcing racial equality in the South collapsed in the late 1870s and had been abandoned by 1880, leading to the Jim Crow era. Historian Eric Foner stated, "Every election in Louisiana between 1868 and 1876 was marked by rampant violence and pervasive fraud." In 1920, a committee met in Colfax to purchase a monument to memorialize the 3 white men who had died. This monument stands in the Colfax Cemetery. In 1950, Louisiana erected a state highway marker which read that the event of 1873 was the Colfax Riot, as that was traditionally known in the white community. The marker states, "On this site occurred the Colfax Riot, in which 3 white men and 150 Negroes were slain. This event on April 13, 1873 marked the end of carpetbag misrule in the South." The marker was removed on May 15, 2021, and placed in a museum. On April 13, 2023, the 150th anniversary of the Colfax Massacre, the old marker was replaced with the erection of a 7-foot granite monument that listed the 57 Black people confirmed by name to have been killed in the massacre. The rest are still unknowns. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History.
Okay, so I had to breathe and pray through that one. May Allah be pleased with the efforts of those not only who died in that massacre, but who even attempted to create this Black settlement and many others. And I have to say that I am so grateful for the coming of Master Sajdah Muhammad, who will have our back as we begin to settle. And that's all I'm going to say about that. This is why What the Honorable Elijah Muhammad proposed as separation was and is bold and is very serious. I know a lot of us can't pay attention to focus on this kind of stuff. Some of us are just not builders. Some of us are preachers. Some of us are builders and developers. And if you're a builder, then stay tuned this week, because we're going to be talking about these tactics. And like I said, they aren't all violence. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about city planning and how city planning was used against us. But we have to study. We have to study these things. I saw several tactics mentioned in that video that I see happening to this very day. It's just dressed up in different public relations outfits, if you will. So when you see your grandparents or your great grandparents and you casually just say, oh, they moved up here from Alabama or Mississippi or Louisiana, or any of these areas where this type of violence was the order of the day, think about what they sacrificed. We have an episode of a series that we're doing on the Elijah Muhammad house called The Messenger's Residence. And in one of the episodes, I visited Sandersville, Winona County, and use some place-based education myself so that I could understand the level of terror that he and so many of our people were subjected to. And so when we saw them stand on business when they got up north, we can understand why. And then there were those that were so traumatized that they never spoke of it again. And all they wanted to do was to get up north and do what? Forget about it. Get a good job and just forget about it. That affects us to this day as well. Okay. So whether we're finding ourselves being one of the ones who are building a brand new territory, whether we are in villages and towns where we are now forced to govern ourselves, if we are thinking about going to a wasted city and seeing if we can rebuild, or if we are just those with supreme wisdom integrating into a system where we are the minority, we all have to study this history. Because what I see Allah doing is this separation concept is very multifactorial. All right. So thank you, family. I appreciate you all for listening. Tune in tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. We're going to talk about planning, city planning and zoning and things like that that were used to destroy some of these Black settlements. Thank you very much, Brother Ronald. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Sunkissed Copper Color, 704 Joe. Thank you all in the chat. Thank you. This series ain't about numbers. This is about those who are willing to sit down and go, okay, we want to study this. We want to learn it. We're going to strategically plan, because we are taught to be the best in civilized society. So we don't want to be the aggressor. We don't want to be the ones attacking each other and others. But we also have to know how to defend ourselves as well. We have to know how to strategically plan on the front end so that we can ignite the power that's been given to us by Master Father Muhammad. Thank you, Brother Robert 11X. Thank you very much. Okay, family. I know you may be triggered. This is not designed to trigger you. It's not designed to incite violence. It's not designed to make you depressed. This conversation is designed so that we can plan. All right. Peace and blessings, family. Don't go anywhere. If you want to donate, please donate. I'm going to continue to try to bring this type of thought-provoking programming to you. Just go to Cash App. Sajdah Enterprises is scrolling across the bottom, or you can go to Zelle. Or if you say, hey, I just want to donate to the museum, then go to ElijahMuhammadHouse.com. There's QR codes there where you can make a donation. All right. But we want you to give so that we can continue to bring this program to you. Let's see. I see one more comment. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. All right. Praise be to Allah. We will see you all, inshallah, tomorrow morning.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who in my judgment is the master historian, taught us that of all our studies, history is the most attractive, and it is best qualified to reward the researcher. History is most attractive. Why should history be most attractive? Because history is the recorded time of the human family in its struggle to overcome obstacles. There is no life that is without struggle. The Holy Quran teaches us that man, meaning man and woman, is made to face difficulties. And after difficulty comes ease. But it is history that guides us through difficulty. For if you know how people who had difficulty yesterday got through, and if your difficulty is somewhat similar, then today we also can get through if we follow the guidance of history. This is why Carter G. Woodson and many of our black giants fought for black people to know our history. Because in not knowing our history, we don't have a guide. And without a guide, we are lost. No wonder